a uh, a proposal made by community groups that was much had much more teeth, yes, and it was watered down a lot by the time it passed, and based on the preliminary feedback, it does seem like it was watered down too much to be effective, and so I know in reading the report on it, some of the aldermen in Detroit who had supported the original ordinance, one of the things they're going to want to amend is that 4 to 6 week time frame in terms of the process, because that definitely wasn't long enough. But I still think as long as the developer is able to say no to everything, then there's a problem. And so our ordinance would not want to allow that sort of thing to happen.
It is 12 noon at WZRD Chicago, 88.3 FM, and we have in the studio with us Istvan Beckett of One Northside discussing community benefits agreements and specifically One Northside's push for a citywide ordinance that helps mandate community benefits agreements. We will continue our discussion, and I wanted to ask you to Istvan, is there any way that an ordinance can pass that will have that enforcement that will have teeth enough for a developer not to be able to walk away after an agreement?
I mean, I think that's our goal, and that's what we're going to be fighting for. And I think for this to be successful, that has to be the case.
Are there many community members impacted? If there are sufficient numbers of community members impacted, and they make their views and votes known to their aldermen, would that help?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I think this is something that makes sense for everybody, right? When development comes into the neighborhood, having local control over that process and making sure that development is addressing what the community wants, there is no reason in my mind for anybody to be against that. Um, so yeah, I think the community definitely is impacted by the developments going into their neighborhoods. For all the people, whose rents are going up, you probably most directly can see the results of these. For people who lose their jobs because their business gets closed down because a development comes into the neighborhood, you are obviously seeing the effects of development very, very directly. And I think, all of us every day could see development in our neighborhoods and have thoughts about, you know, more that development could be doing for the neighborhood.
So it seems as if development leads to gentrification, and gentrification affects negatively affects a lot of middle class wage earners. And would you say that are you trying to say that the people that will most benefit from a citywide community benefits agreement ordinance would be those that will be impacted by negatively impacted by gentrification?
Well, I wouldn't want to limit ourselves in that way, because you know paying people in your neighborhood a living wage is good for everybody. It's good for homeowners. It's good for people who rent. That is a good thing for everybody. In Uptown, we have a large homeless population. Offering affordable housing to people, we had the whole tent community, people living under bridges because there was not enough affordable housing. So, who would be against people having affordable housing versus having to live under a bridge, right? That is,
Yes.
again, good for everybody. So, while gentrification, is something that negatively impacts working class folks, as you mentioned, I think the nice thing about a community benefits agreement and a community benefits agreement ordinance is it can be structured in a way so that everybody benefits from it.
So, in order for it to pass and to have teeth in it, what is it about a community benefits agreement that would actually benefit a developer and let's say also the alderman, so that maybe we have some common ground and then the ordinance could come to pass?
Well, so I would argue that the benefit to the aldermen is it gives them a better mechanism to represent the interests of their community, which is really their entire job, right? I mean, that's why we elect aldermen, so they're at the table representing our interests. And all this would do for them was create a better way for them to represent their community interests, because right now, when it comes to development within the communities, there is no rules of the road for these aldermen in terms of how to engage with their communities and what kind of feedback they have. They all do this in an ad hoc fashion. They have these different committees, and some work this way, some work that way, and so on and so forth. So I think it would be a benefit to the alderman that way, and for the developer, I think having community support for your development is going to be helpful for you. And as long as your project remains economically viable, why would you be against making it doing it in a way that is beneficial to the community it's going to exist in, right? If you're a business located in one of these developments, you're going to want to have a good relationship with your community, not an adversarial one. So I really think this can be done in a way where any negative impact is greatly minimized, and the positives will far outweigh the negatives.
Okay, one more important question. So, among all the community organizations that you've worked with, has there ever been an organization that happened to work with a developer that something came out of those negotiations that was good? Was there a developer that was willing to happily work with a community organization, or has it always been adversarial?
Well, so in my experience, the community benefits agreement I worked on, the developer was not adversarial at all. And, honestly, I think it was a bit of a bait and switch tactic, because in the end, he told us to take a hike and walked away without committing to anything. But there were no objections raised to any of the things we discussed with him, and we had several face-to-face meetings, and it was all so the baseline requirements that I talked about here. There are community groups who have been able to get concessions from developers, but those have been through the alderman. Versus any type of contract directly with the community, or it's been through a contract the developer has with the city of Chicago directly. And one of the things that we've seen with the SRO ordinance is that just because an ordinance is on the books, if it's solely up to the city to monitor and enforce it, things can fall through the cracks. So in our minds, it's very important that the community itself is part of monitoring and enforcing the commitments these developers make. So that's what we're looking for, is those benefits that people have maybe been able to win in kind of these one-off unique situation. There's more of a standardized process by which we're getting those benefits on a consistent basis.
Would you have enforcement details in an agreement? And if so, what kind of enforcement details would you be suggesting?
So, I think enforcement is something that, in my mind, in terms of once an ordinance is put into place, that we don't have quite pinned down yet, because enforcement can take a bunch of different forms, right? And the city could enforce breaches of the, well, one, I think there needs to be a reporting structure by where the developer is reporting to the city and the community the steps they've taken towards meeting their obligations. And there's actually a system out there that exists whereby when a developer hires somebody, for instance, to meet like a local hiring requirement, that they just input that hire into that system and the data is updated in real time. So I think reporting creates that ability, but then for actually enforcement, you know, there's options out there. For instance, the city could suspend their license applications until they rectify the situation, or fine them. You know, so there's enforcement like that from the city, but also if you had private nonprofits, right? I shouldn't say private, but nonprofits that were parties to these contracts, and the nonprofits could pursue enforcement, you know, on their own.
Like NGOs.
Right.
But local. Okay, that's so interesting. Well, thank you so much, Istvan. We have been speaking with Istvan Beckett of One Northside about the One Northside's push for a city ordinance that mandates community benefits agreements. Is that a good way of putting it, Istvan?
Yes, I think so, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool, good. Would you like a picture? Yes. Here, take a picture with, I guess, with my headphones on. Yeah?
Yes. Yeah, let me.
How you doing, bro?
All right, and you?
Good, sir. Good.
Good interview.
I hope I sounded like I kind of